Hello, and thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Bite Size Cybercrime, the podcast where we discuss cybercrimes and cybersecurity news. This week we'll be talking about an outage that happened last week that you may have noticed with Cloudflare. Cloudflare provides a range of services that are primarily focused on making sure internet services stay available. They provide a content delivery network, which is a global system of servers all over the world that can host the same content. Cloudflare basically redirects your traffic to the server that's closest to you to improve speeds. They also offer protection from DDoS, or distributed denial of service attacks. And they have some bot prevention capabilities. Cloudflare is a very large vendor that acts as a middleman for a lot of companies. So when they go down, the impact is felt pretty hard. Tuesday, November 18th, there was an outage of many different services, including Uber, Canva, ChatGPT, Archive of Our Own. Ironically, even Down Detector was affected. So, what happened? Cloudflare released a post-mortem on their website explaining everything. Some early speculation, including by Cloudflare themselves, was that this was some sort of cyber attack, more specifically a DDoS attack against Cloudflare, as some sort of test to see if they could be taken down by some nation-state actor. Okay, Cloudflare didn't say that second part, that was mostly just speculation on the internet, but they did initially think it was a DDoS attack. So, what is a DDoS attack before I move further? A DDoS, or distributed denial of service attack, is a type of attack where computers, mostly controlled by some sort of malware from all around the world, spam some kind of web service with requests in order to take it down and make it unavailable to legitimate users. What Cloudflare was experiencing, however, was not a DDoS attack. It was an internal issue, triggered by a change in a database system's permissions. This caused that database to output multiple entries into a file that was used by Cloudflare's bot management system. That file unexpectedly doubled in size, with none of the services accounting for this. And then it propagated to all the machines that make up Cloudflare's network. When the software used to route traffic tried to read this file, which keeps the bot management system up to date with new bots and new threats, it crashed due to the file size now surpassing that limit. Once Cloudflare realized the cause of this outage, they remediated the issue and restored traffic, which returned to normal after a couple of hours. The reason most people, even Cloudflare themselves, thought this was a DDoS attack is because of the very unusual nature of it. Basically, the volume of HTTP server errors spiked and then would fluctuate a lot. This is expected in a DDoS attack, as some of the bot machines in the attack may not send data consistently, or they may get blocked and then a new machine joins, or they change their IP to get around the blocking. In some kind of internal system error like that, you typically wouldn't expect to see these kind of fluctuations in traffic. Repeatedly failing and briefly recovering just usually doesn't happen if it's some consistent internal error. It turns out that these fluctuations did actually happen for a reason. They were being caused by the file being generated every 5 minutes by a query running on a ClickHouse server, which was also being updated at the same time. This created a perfect storm. The bad data would only be generated if the search query was run on part of the cluster that had been updated with, that new bad data. So sometimes the data generated was completely fine, and sometimes it was that misconfigured giant file that would crash everything. So it led to this inconsistent pattern of different spikes of unavailable service. I've seen a lot of people theorizing online about nation-state hackers threatening the United States economy by taking out Cloudflare, AWS, Azure, all the other big cloud services that a lot of the economy relies on to keep running. I do understand the concerns around them, but honestly, I often operate by Hanlon's razor, which is never attribute to malice, which is adequately explained by stupidity. And for the record, I am not calling Cloudflare stupid. They provide services that are now critical to so much of the internet, and they're very important. But this is a reminder that oftentimes the answer to these big problems is simple and not malicious. Now, of course, there's plenty of malice in the cybersecurity world. I am not ignoring that at all, and you should often also assume malice. But this honestly didn't strike me as a DDoS attack even when it was actively going on. DDoSing is not really a super common method of attacking organizations anymore, and going after Cloudflare specifically requires an absolutely massive amount of resources that really very few threat actors or even nation-state actors have. And Cloudflare protects so much of the internet it may actually be against their interest because it could inadvertently take down some of the services the hackers are using themselves. Not saying it's impossible, but if Cloudflare says it was an internal error, I fully believe them. I have seen similar dumb errors blow things up in pretty similar ways more times than I can count. Cloudflare has since apologized for the incident, calling it unacceptable, and has reassured customers that with every challenge it faces, they manage to build back stronger and more resilient. And I really hope they do, because as a content delivery, network, bot prevention, DDoS prevention site, resiliency is kind of their whole thing. I think a big takeaway here is the dangers of relying too much on single points of failure for keeping your websites resilient. Unfortunately, in this case, there's not a lot of alternatives that even compare to Cloudflare. I do appreciate the cloud for what it allows to happen. When Zoom absolutely boomed in popularity during COVID 2020, it was because they could actually afford to rapidly expand due to being a cloud shop. They didn't have to buy more physical servers. They just added more resources to their existing instances. And yeah, that spiked their prices, but they also made a lot of money off of new customers. I am concerned with how much companies like Cloudflare, though, basically have a monopoly over CDN services. AWS and Azure have some offerings that can provide something similar, but we run into the same problem where if everything sits on that one vendor failure, it's catastrophic. The best solution I have to offer for issues like this is hybrid cloud environments, but those can be incredibly pricey to maintain just in case something bad happens. However, there are ways to sync your data across multiple cloud services or even a hybrid and on-premises environment. Rather than just ditching the cloud entirely, I think it makes a lot of sense to account for issues like this in resilience or business continuity planning. Because if something can go wrong, it will go wrong. And it's honestly not so uncommon to see outages of these types of services. I've seen AWS go down quite a few times in a year, so it's not like this is some completely unrealistic threat that could never take down Amazon. It's already happening. Either way, I'm glad it wasn't actually an attack against Cloudflare and that it was just some dumb issue that happened internally. But still, a lot of shops need to consider how someone else's failure could also result in their own, and what the implications of that mean. I'll leave you on that note. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime, and another thanks to Cloudflare, Dark Reading, AP News, CNET, and Tom's Guide for information on this outage, and some of the fun stuff that came with it. It was really interesting to read, and it's nice to know that sometimes even large companies make mistakes, and they're human too. Well, they're made of humans, I suppose. Anyways, until next time, stay secure.